Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to Mr. Crane's amendment and urge members to support the bill as reported by the Appropriations Committee. I do want to say, however, that unless there are some substantial changes in public broadcasting and its relationship to the working people of America, my vote and my position might be very different next year. Mr. Chairman, one of the great dangers in America today, and something that frightens me and many other Americans very much, is the growing concentration of ownership in the mass media. Fewer and larger corporations increasingly control what we see on television, what we hear on the radio, and what we read in the newspapers and magazines. The noted journalist and author Ben Bagdikian has written in his book, The Media Monopoly, that by the turn of the century, a handful of huge multinational corporations will not only control what we see and hear in America, but in fact will be controlling what much of the world sees, hears, and reads. That's a very dangerous trend. Mr. Chairman, it is not an accident that the Rush Limbaughs, the Pat Buchanans, and the G. Gordon Liddies dominate commercial radio talk shows. Their views reflect the interests of the corporations which own those radio networks. It is also not an accident that on commercial radio and television there is very little serious discussion about the enormous problems facing the working people and the poor people of this nation. The average working family in America is in trouble, they are under stress, they are hurting. But that reality is not reflected in the corporately controlled media. Yes, we do have round-the-clock analysis of the O.J. Simpson case and the Menendez brothers saga and the Bobbitt family adventures and the Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan adventure. Yes, we have in-depth analyses of why the Houston Rockets were able to defeat the New York Knickerbockers and why the Washington Redskins did not do so well this last season. Yes, the airwaves are filled with violence and blood in 30-second commercials, which are having an extremely negative impact on the cognitive abilities of the young kids of America. But somehow, just somehow, there is virtually no programming which explains to the American people why the standard of living of American workers has gone from first place in the world 20 years ago to 13th place today. Somehow, we don't have programming which deals with that. Somehow, there is very little discussion or portrayal on television about the growing gap between the rich and the poor in America. I guess we just don't have time on TV for that. Or about the fact that the wealthiest 1% of our population owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. Or about how multinational corporations are moving to the third world and are hiring workers of 15, 20 cents an hour while they're throwing American workers out on the street. I guess that's just not interesting enough to put on our TV airwaves. Should we be surprised that General Electric's NBC or the corporations that own the other networks don't focus very much on these issues? Well, I'm not surprised, and I think the average American is not surprised. Mr. Chairman, the reason that public broadcasting was established and why taxpayers are contributing to public television and radio is that it is supposed to offer an alternative point of view to that offered by the corporately owned networks. It is supposed to give a voice to those who have no voice. It is supposed to be able to deal with controversy without being afraid of offending corporate sponsors. That's the reason that it exists. It is supposed to take on the entrenched special interests because it is funded by the ordinary people of this country, the people who are not wealthy, the people who are not powerful, the people who do not own ABC, CBS, or NBC. In other words, radical thought that it may be, public television is supposed to represent the interests of the public. I know that's a radical thought, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Sadly, despite what its original mandate was, despite the fact that there is some excellent programming on public television, some very fine children's programming on public television. Despite all of that, very few people can argue that public television has fulfilled its original mandate. In fact, year after year, it appears that public television is more and more coming to resemble commercial television. Mr. Chairman, I do not object that there are 3 regularly scheduled business shows on PBS. I would ask for 2 more minutes.
I yield, Chairman.
I thank the Chairman very much. Mr. Chairman, I do not object that there are 3 regularly scheduled business shows on PBS. Wall Street